Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Ayo. And good morning, Rufai. How's everybody doing this morning?
We're pushing.
Okay,
we're pushing.
good. Thank you. It is. Good morning to you, viewers.
To lose the lead.
I didn't hear that.
Moving on.
Good morning to you, viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, we begin today's World Brief with news that Florida's Attorney General has called for an investigation into the death of 4 people on a speedboat from the state of Florida after it entered Cuban waters and began firing on Border Patrol troops. Now, let's take a closer look at what happened. So we've got a map, first off, that's going to break this down for us. So the speedboat in question was 1 nautical mile, which is northeast, it says, of the El Pino Canal, as well as Cayo Falcones. And it is believed that the boat came from the Florida Straits up here and traveled into Cuban waters. Now, this is according to Cuban authorities. After traveling into Cuban waters, 5 Cuban Border Patrol troops approached the American registered boat. And according to the Cuban authorities, the people on that speedboat then started shooting at the Border Patrol agents, injuring the commander of the Cuban boat. In response, the Cubans returned fire, killing 4 people and injuring 6 others. Those injured parties were then evacuated and taken for medical assistance. Now, at this point, the identities of the people on that speedboat, where they were from, or why they entered Cuban waters remains publicly unknown. What we do know is that the Cuban government said that it is determined to protect its territorial waters, and that is in accordance with its own national defense principles. This was a tweet coming, or a post on X from the Cuban presidency. Now, let's not forget that this incident comes amid increased tensions between the United States and Cuba, which is facing a deepening fuel crisis that has been worsened by the United States blocking oil shipments from Venezuela, which is a long-standing ally of Cuba in the region. Now, moving on now to see Marco Rubio. He himself now is actually in St. Kitts and Nevis for the CARICOM summit. And he's been meeting with Caribbean leaders amid the Trump administration's effort to really ramp up pressure on Cuba's government and other issues in the region. But this is what Marco Rubio had to say when he was asked about this incident involving this Florida registered speedboat. Let's take a listen.
Shortly, we will know quickly many more facts about this incident than we know right now. The majority of the facts being publicly reported are those by the information provided by the Cubans. We will verify that independently. But suffice it to say, it is highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time. But we're going to find out. We're not going to base our conclusions on what they've told us.
Now, just in case you'd forgotten, since September of 2025, the United States has killed at least 148 people in a series of attacks in the Caribbean Sea and the East Pacific Ocean against what it calls narco-terrorists. So the United States has killed a lot of people when it comes to protecting waters, even when they're not traditionally their own territory waters. Let's move on to our other story. We've got the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. He is in Israel on a 2-day visit where he has thrown his support behind Tel Aviv, condemning the October 7, 2023 attacks. Now, Modi also became the first Indian premier to address the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, where he again drew parallels to that 26th of November Mumbai attacks, which also included Israeli victims. Now, going back to the situation in Gaza, Modi actually didn't mention India's long-standing support of a 2-state solution. He didn't mention that specifically, but he did have this to say to Israel. Let's take a listen.
I also carry with me the deepest condolences of the people of India for every life lost and for every family whose world was shattered in the barbaric terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7. We feel your pain. we share your grief. India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction in this moment and beyond.
So certainly another example of Narendra Modi's positive diplomacy. He is somebody who we've seen have positive relations with many different leaders. You'll remember when he went to Ethiopia, had a wonderful relationship there, a wonderful trip there. Just recently, the French president was in India, in Mumbai with Modi. And again, we are seeing him having positive relations with Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli lawmakers. Well, let's move on now to our last story on today's World Brief. And we're coming home to the African continent. We're in Senegal because Senegal's government is moving to significantly toughen penalties for same-sex relations, with lawmakers backing a proposal to double prison sentences for those convicted under the country's anti-LGBT laws. Now, same-sex activity is already criminalized in Senegal, and it carries jail terms of up to 5 years. This new measure would increase both prison time and fines in what supporters are describing as a move to reinforce traditional values. But human rights groups have condemned the proposal, and it is warning that it could further marginalize LGBT people and deepen fears of harassment and violence, especially if they were to extend these prison sentences from 5 years to 10 years. Well, there's a lot to discuss, but first let's take a look at our newspaper headlines from across Nigeria and indeed the world. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day does report that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has urged the Senate to begin amending the 1999 Constitution in order to accommodate state police. And this is part of efforts to tackle terrorism, banditry, and insurgency. And if we take a look at the very top of This Day this morning, the newspaper is also reporting that members of the organized private sector have welcomed the Central Bank of Nigeria's cautious reduction of the MPR rate, that is the monetary policy rate, to 26.5%. Let us move on to The Punch this morning, because The Punch is reporting that the Acting Inspector General of Police has declared a zero tolerance for corruption and impunity within the Nigerian police force. He was decorated by President Tinubu on Wednesday, and he was charged by the president to restore public confidence and improve security. Let's take a look at the Daily Trust this morning. Now, the Daily Trust does report, it does actually lead on the Department of State Services. The DSS has finally released Walida Abdulhadi Ibrahim to the Jigawa State Governor Umar Namadi, who assured the public that her safety and recovery would be prioritized while the circumstances surrounding her alleged abduction are resolved in court. Now, staying with the Daily Trust, it also reports that a federal high court has ordered the bit. Let's take a look. Let's go back to the Daily Trust, please. Thank you very much. So it's this story just here. Now, the Daily Trust is also reporting that the Federal High Court has ordered billionaire Mohammed Indimi's company Oriental Energy to pay his daughters, their twin girls, Amina and Zara Indimi, $43.51 million in a long-running dispute over dividends. Now, the twins had claimed that they were unfairly excluded from the dividend pool despite jointly holding 10% of the company. Well, moving on now to the Daily Sun, we can see that it is reporting that the Department of State Services has arrested Sani Yusuf. He is the sixth suspect in the 2022 St. Francis Catholic Church attack in Owo, Ondo State, which killed over 40 worshippers. And unfortunately, still in that same vein, if we move on to the Daily Independent, we can also see that meanwhile, this newspaper is reporting that gunmen attacked a Celestial Church of Christ parish, also in Ondo State, where 6 people, worshippers they were abducted during an early morning service. Now, police have confirmed that 1 victim has been rescued and 1 suspect arrested. It is very, very unsettling news there. And the Daily Independent does also report that the National Assembly's Joint Petroleum Committees have also warned the Minister of Finance, Wale Odun, and heads of key ministries, departments, and agencies to appear before an investigative hearing into the oil and gas sector or risk arrest warrants. And that is as lawmakers are beginning a probe focused on transparency in the management of petroleum resources. Let's take a look at the New Telegraph this morning. The New Telegraph, still in this theme of insecurity and churches in Nigeria, it is reporting that Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria has urged the President Tinubu, to take urgent action to tackle insecurity, economic hardship, and electoral challenges here in Nigeria. That is the New Telegraph's lead story. And the New Telegraph also reports that a bandit leader has contradicted the federal government's position. The federal government's claim that no ransom was paid for the release of those abducted school children in Niger State. Now, this person alleges that negotiators paid 60 million naira, and that was reduced from an initial 100 million naira demand, while the government maintains that the pupils were freed through intelligence operations without any ransom payment. That is what we're reading on the cover of the New Telegraph. And let's move over to our UK papers. We'll take a look at the British Guardian this morning, and it is reporting quite sobering news when we're looking at the maternity statistics. So NHS maternity services in England are often resorting to covering up their mistakes. And that is according to The Guardian. A damning report says that some hospitals are also falsifying records when women and babies suffer harm. Now, staying with the newspaper, Donald Trump is also pictured giving his State of the Union address. The newspaper also suggests that Iran is ready to reach a deal with the United States over its nuclear program. So we are keeping an eye on that. Let's move on to The Sun this morning, because The Sun is reporting that there is essentially more about this situation with the campaigner, the Tourette's campaigner, who involuntarily shouted a racial slur. So we're talking about the BBC's serious mistake, essentially. It did fail to edit out a racial slur at the BAFTAs. Now, John Davidson, who you're seeing on the screen there, he does have Tourette's. He is a campaigner, and he was at the awards ceremony because a film had been made highlighting this issue. Now, he shouted offensive words involuntarily while two black actors, Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, were on stage. Now, he is said to be angry at being sitting at a microphone during an awards ceremony, allowing his involuntary tics to be picked up. So perhaps that is something for the BBC to consider. And those are your headlines from today. Over to you for your thoughts.
No. He shouldn't go there. He shouldn't gaslight us now because he's got Tourette's. If you have Tourette's and you scream involuntary words that are racially abusive, it means that you have them in your head, because it's what is in your faculty that will come out when you have tics from Tourette's. So people should stop.
Saying that he shouldn't have had a microphone.
People should stop gaslighting us. So it's a reflection of his mind. You should stop. I know people that have got Tourette's in the UK. I've dealt with them. Involuntary tics, abusive words comes out like that. It's a reflection of what is happening in your mind. So his mind is dirty. Reflection of that. So let's stop deceiving ourselves. As regards Trump and this deal, this Iranian deal, after threatening fire and brimstone, getting everybody locked and loaded, they said, yes, they want as much as possible to do a deal. They're having a conversation. But the Iranians, in fact, this story came out about last week. And I saw Argachi when he came on Morning Joe on MSNBC. He said, we are not close to a deal yet. And he kept on reassuring people that we're not close to a deal yet, because a lot of people in the US media kept on reporting that there's a deal. The question we should first ask Trump, why did he repeal the JCPOA? Because there was nothing wrong with the JCPOA. You just wanted to assert yourself, and that's why you repealed the JCPOA, and you've got no alternative, because it took them a lot to be able to negotiate the JCPOA in the first place, and the JCPOA deal was working. So all of this Trump is doing definitely at some point will backfire. Just like some interesting report is now coming out that the DOJ actually hiding files of somebody that had actually testified that Trump had sexual abuse of a younger person. At some point, the DOJ removed all of those documents from their archive. There's an investigation going. I think PBS has also revealed it, that the DOJ did do that. So when you have all of this man is in big soup. He's toast. He's not fit to be a leader. So for those that support him, I don't know what is going on. And I think we'll follow what Rubio says about the incident over, Florida and Cuba, because we don't know. And it's very unusual. You see, you have a lot of Cuban people of Cuban extraction going, via, a boat, armed like that. And, there's an exchange. if my memory serves me right, the only time you remember something like that, maybe the days of Sierra Mestra or the Bay of Pig invasion and things like that. It's very unusual in modern times. So let us get the investigation out and let's not jump ahead of ourselves.
Talking about investigations, let me stay on the Guardian newspaper, which you have still behind you. Front page story, big one, around the NHS maternity unit cover-ups. It was an investigation actually commissioned by the Health Secretary last year, August, based on a number of complaints that had been received in different regions across the UK. And so the report is now out and it is scandalous. But, where they talk about cover-ups, especially when things didn't go right in order to keep the image or, the records of the NHS clean. But I think it speaks to a deeper issue around the NHS that has been in conversation for a while now, around its viability, the declining standards, the long wait time, the lack of personnel required for the number of cases that come in, and which then results in casualties, deaths, and mismanagement of cases, as we see in this report. And, of course, opposition party has come out to say that it's part of the failings of the Labour Party to not have protected the NHS, at least since they've been in power, even though it was an inherited problem. It is a big conversation around the future of the NHS, which has been going on for decades. That is the UK still able to maintain this structure or this model of healthcare, especially because it means that when people don't pay for the services, directly, the quality of care reduces. There's a survey around the fact that less people, a less percentage of UK citizens are accessing NHS because they just look for an alternative source because of the quality of care going from the NHS. And maybe it's a conversation for us here as well on the African continent, particularly in Nigeria, that when you're looking for quality service, you cannot take away costs. You can't. If you're going to get quality, whether it be in healthcare, power, whether you're going to have to pay for it, it's who the burden would fall on. And that's why we keep making a case, of course, for the health insurance service. I don't know to what extent Keir Starmer does not need any more, he doesn't need any more trouble at the moment because he's facing a lot, and it looks more and more that his end or the end of his tenure is nigh. And then let me go to the front page of the This Day newspaper, which I was going to talk about earlier on, around the president during his iftar meeting with the senators, calling and pushing for state police. The way that he has been very, vocal and big on this, I believe that under his administration, we might very well see a move in that direction, because now he has charged the senators who have pledged their loyalty to him. So it's only a matter of time. But what we're asking for is that how do we prevent incidents like what's happened or the allegations in those states whereby state governors abuse the powers of state police? Imagine, without the state police being in effect, what the accusations and counter-accusations coming up, especially during political season. How would we put it in legislation to ensure that we're able to protect institutions, strengthen the institutions such that not one person or governor can take advantage of those powers? So those are some of the conversations, because I believe that under this administration, we might very well see state police come into actualization based on the synergy of the executive and the Senate. But let's see how we can safeguard in the piece of legislation abuse of power by subnationals.
I would like to comment on some stories that I consider key. First, you quoted the Catholics bishops of Nigeria saying to President Tinubu, you have to do something about security, check the carnage that is going on. Why that is relevant, I would like to charge the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria to pay attention to the fact that Pope Leo XIV will be visiting 4 African countries in April. The first Papa visit by Pope Leo XIV, he will be going to Algeria, the birthplace of St. Augustine of Hippo. He'll be going to Cameroon, Angola, and also Equatorial Guinea. Nigeria needs prayers at this time, as we're looking at general elections in 2027. Is there something that can still be done to lobby for the Pope to come and pray for us in this place
what did you do?
No. We need prayers. You cannot have more than enough prayers. Secondly, as for Senegal, where Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko now says they're going to double the penalty, maximum penalty for LGBTQ same-sex offense from 5 years maximum now to 10 years maximum. The penal code is also going to be reviewed from 3 to 7 years. Well, human rights groups are protesting. However, religious groups in that country have been saying this is the right way to go. That the parliament has not fixed a date for the hearing. And Sonko is saying that all the religious groups should support this attempt by the opposition to impose Western values on the country of Senegal. However, Senegal is even following also. In Nigeria, in 2014, Nigeria enacted what is called the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, where the maximum penalty is 14 years. And where, anybody who hates and abets homosexuality in Nigeria will be sentenced to 10 years. That's what our law in Nigeria says. But in Africa generally, Uganda has the harshest penalty, they say, in the world even. It's been there since 1902 and then reviewed 2013, 2023, where the death penalty challenged by the Supreme Court of Canada is also the issue. But so, you see, homosexuality is a very controversial thing. Africans talk about their values. The Westerners talk about their own values, divergent in that regard. Cuba, very quickly. In Cuba, they are having CARICOM, which is the conference of 15 states of the Caribbean and the Americas. At this moment in St. Kitts, right?
St. Kitts and Nevis.
Yeah, St. Kitts and Nevis. St. Kitts and Nevis. Marco Rubio was supposed to be there yesterday. But the major issue there, now that Cuba is in the conversation, is about Cuba. With the CARICOM countries saying they are likely to be affected by Cuba. Cuba has a blockade in terms of getting oil, and that is creating a lot of crisis. President Trump has said Cuba should be boycotted. The CARICOM countries should support the United States and turn against China. So this is the context of this crisis. It's not 148 boat victims that were killed. Actually, the figure is 151. And now this is the context in Florida, where you have a lot of Cuban Americans. They are asking for investigation. And, Marco Rubio is saying that they don't believe the Cuban version of it. So in that region, with America trying to control, under the Manifest Destiny mandate, its region, its backyard, that's the major problem. But we'll see what happens in terms of the outcome of the CARICOM conference that is taking place in St. Kitts and Nevis. Finally, the highest moment in Modi's visit to Israel was Prime Minister Netanyahu wearing Indian traditional attire, and both leaders referring to themselves as brother and as friend and all that. The last time Modi visited was 2017, but the discussion was more about innovation, agriculture, cooperation, and zero tolerance for terrorism. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Adefemi.
Thank you.